55.
What?
What?
Oh.
Hi,
How
everybody.
are we here?
We're still at the Annapolis Book Festival. We are back again. We are here with Addison Armstrong, author of The War Librarian.
Oh.
I put in our Instagram, I did a story about this book because this is so good, guys.
The
It's so
feels,
good.
guys. I have the feels.
So thank you so much for coming today.
No, thank
and
you. I'm
being
so excited to be with y'all.
Oh my gosh, we are excited. Like,
Big fans.
when-
It's contagious.
Yeah, it's like when we're both into a book, there's just a totally
Oh,
different
it's
vibe.
a vibe.
It's a totally different vibe. So, a little bit about
Addison.
dang it.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Addison is an elementary school teacher and author of historical fiction. She wrote her first book, The Lights of Luna Park, as a junior at Vanderbilt. No big deal.
No
Whatever.
big deal. First of all,
Vanderbilt.
she was still a junior
at Vanderbilt.
and she was at Vanderbilt. So, you know.
Well, people act like that's so impressive, but I think it's much harder for people who have kids and who have, that's full time and
Yeah.
classes
But,
are not.
Even, it's a hard school to get into, baby.
We have
You were-
we have an author friend, Francesca Zappia, who writes YA, and her first book was published when she was a senior in high school. And we're like,
What? Yes.
That's incredible.
Jesse,
What?
you know, baby. Yeah. And she's just like, whatever, it's not a big deal.
It's just what I
It's a big
do.
deal. So she graduated twice. You've got married. War librarian. You currently live in Manhattan with your husband.
so
Been a
cool.
busy couple of years.
So cool.
You teach science and English in Brooklyn and
Yes.
continue to write historical fiction for
Yeah.
adults and children.
Yes.
I love that.
I love it. So why don't you give us a quick
Synopsis
synopsis of
of-
the book?
Of The War Librarian.
The
Okay.
War Librarian,
So
yeah.
it's dual timeline, which is my favorite thing to read. And the first timeline, as y'all know, is 1918. Emmeline is a librarian in D.C. And through a series of events, she ends up all the way in France working as a hospital librarian or a war librarian. And what she does is prescribe books to the soldiers who are in this hospital. It's a base hospital, but it's very close to the front. It's serving more sort of as an evacuation hospital because there's just so many injuries coming through. And that's the first timeline. And she has to deal not only with the fact that she's in the middle of a war, but also all of this censorship that she's dealing with, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more.
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will.
And it can go on for hours. As well as there's someone there who she knew as a child. So there's maybe a little bit of romance going on.
Possibly a smidge.
And then in the second timeline, it's 1976. It's here in Annapolis, and Kathleen is part of the first co-ed class at the Naval Academy, which, yes, it was rough.
Rough. I don't know how you wrote that without
it was
losing it.
painful. I
Yes.
mean, some of it you would think I would, I wouldn't believe it if I read it in a fiction book, but I read it in a memoir of someone who,
yeah.
and
It
it
was
was true.
in the Coast Guard.
Yes,
so
she was telling me boot camp, all that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I just,
it's very triggering. So I will say that there
Yeah,
is
I
some
always do
stuff.
want to give people warning.
It is very triggering as someone that was in the military, but the accuracy, ma'am, chef's kiss,
Yeah.
as the
thank
kids
you.
say.
So she's dealing with that, and then also with some secrets from her past that are bubbling up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they intertwine somehow.
Yeah.
Somehow.
You're gonna have to read to find
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. And so I just want to say I am a librarian. So I have been a librarian. I was a teacher before. I'm now a public librarian. And I've been a member of ALA for my entire career. Did not know there were war librarians for ALA.
It's so bizarre.
I was like, I'm just going to fact check this really quick.
She made this up,
I was
right?
like, this can't be real. Prescribing books. And I was like, holy crap, we
Yeah.
really
It's
did
incredible.
that.
Yeah.
And I was like, so this is something I have to share. Historical fiction, not my jam.
I force it on her.
Yes, she does. I like contemporary fiction. I read a lot of romance. I read a lot of YA because I'm a children's librarian,
Right.
and so I read YA and children's books and, all over the gamut. My biggest complaint about historical fiction is I just feel like it needs more research.
Interesting.
The reason that I went and did a story about this book, the reason I was like texting our friend Katie and was like, you need to read this book, is I was like, I have not read a historical fiction book that is this well researched.
Yeah.
It is so in depth. It is so real. Like the power of your craft. Like I am so impressed. And I saw on Instagram, you were talking about how you were excited to be back here in Annapolis because you did your research.
Yes, only a little bit. It was closed for COVID most of the
Right.
time,
Okay.
closed to the public.
Yeah.
So I could not make it out here. So the bulk of my research for that timeline came from a book by Sharon Hanley Disher, who was in that first co-ed class. And I call it a memoir. That's not really true. It's fiction, but it's based on her experiences and
Realistic
the experience
fiction.
of other. Yeah. It's basically, she said, it's a composite of all this. So everything that happens in the book happened to someone she knows. She made it one person.
And
or two
I'm not
characters.
surprised that that's true because,
Right. So that's where I got so much that I never would have. I mean, stupid things. I forget that these were 18-year-old boys.
Yeah.
Their abuse is going to be of the stupid variety.
Right.
They're, the peanut butter jars before they pass it to you.
real.
She's real.
She was real.
At Book Besties, we talk about characters like
if
they're
they're
real
real
people.
humans. Yes.
They are
Then
real
I fit,
people.
I fit right in
have
here.
birthed them into the world.
So that was like, I was fangirling to the beginning, y'all were saying earlier. And our tour guide was interesting. He had graduated the fall or the spring right before the girls started. So he was like, yeah, it was great. We had girls, like long time overdue. And I was like, yes, but so it was interesting that he maybe he would have been better.
His memory is a lot more whitewashed of the situation than everybody else's.
And he was great. He was very sweet, but it was just interesting that like he didn't have to live through it, so he didn't have to really know what was going on.
And what did you think? How did you research the other timeline where you're World War One?
So that one was a little bit harder.
War.
Yes, World War One. So there's not a whole lot about the librarians that actually went overseas. Most of them were in the camps here in the U.S. And most of the ones that went overseas actually went towards the very, very, very end of the war.
Yes.
One of the ones who actually did write letters and things that there is some to get from Mary, I don't know how to pronounce her name, which is embarrassing, Isam. But she was a librarian on the west coast of the U.S. and she ended up over there and she actually landed on V-Day. So,
wow.
So I moved things up a little bit, which is realistic because there were YMCA volunteers, Red Cross volunteers that served as librarians. So for that research, I kind of had to pull from everything. It's like, this is what the YMCA huts looked like. So I'm reading about the YMCA activities. And then this is what librarians were dealing with censorship-wise in the U.S. If they refused to take the German language books off their shelves, they would get... they would resign. Totally by choice. And, so I was pulling from a lot of things. I also...
That's how the military rolls.
Yeah, there are a lot of tie-ins between the two timelines, just like thematically. But the ALA has archives with pictures, which are amazing. I don't know if you came across those in your research.
There was some just on the website that was really cool to see. So ALA, American Library Association, that's our national association. So check that out.
And it's Library Week right now.
So. It is National Library Week.
But they're pictures of the nurses pushing carts through the hospitals, and the men have, their legs are bandaged and they're hanging from the ceiling, the legs, and, just crazy stuff. And so that, a lot of it from there, they have bulletins and meeting minutes published. And then a lot of newspapers asking for donations, asking for book donations. And then actually the list, the War Department memo of the banned books.
Oh, yeah.
That actually leads into another really good question. Yeah. So book banning is the center, one of the centers of this book. It's a personal passion of mine because I'm a librarian and I am 100% in favor of access to information of whatever information you want.
It is.
Right, exactly. No limitations. So I think that your book does a job presenting a reasonable argument for access to information. So how do you feel about book banning as an educator and a writer?
Yes, it's so relevant because people think of the writing. They don't usually think of the educating. But I grew up in Florida.
Oh. Tom did too.
My husband's
luckily that is not where I teach right now, or I would be in a lot of trouble all the time.
She'd be very frustrated right now.
Yes. So, I mean, it's just insane. I totally agree with you 100%. Sure, there are things that kids should not read without guidance, without conversations, and without context.
Right.
But there aren't things that kids shouldn't read.
Right.
Those are two different issues.
Right.
And, people say, well, it's not really banned. It's just not at the library. Well, the library is the place where kids get books for free.
Right.
So, sure, you're only banning it for the kids who need it the most.
Right.
You know,
Well,
it was the only access they
In
had.
the U.S., no book has been banned universally.
Right.
What people don't always know is that when a book is challenged, that's the first step, right? So they make a request to whomever is housing that book. It can be a bookstore, it can be a children's library, it can be whatever, public schools,
library,
whatever.
public library, yeah.
At that point, it's automatically challenged. Someone has officially challenged it. Now, I'm not talking about those people that go to the school board meetings and just read the books that have the P word in it, and they're like, it says pussy. Okay, well, how about some context?
Right.
But this actually happened in we live in a small town in Virginia, and that happened there. So, so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people that really fill out the documentation to say, we do not believe this book should be here. So now it's challenged. When it is actually removed from that space, it is a banned book.
Right.
So
It's no longer there.
you don't have it, it's banned.
Yeah.
It's banned from that place, even if
Exactly.
it's not banned universally. Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting because there's this librarian, the main character of your book there's two main characters, but you've got Emmeline is a librarian who's being told you can't give them these books.
And that's what really gave me the story, right?
Yeah.
I was so fascinated by the fact that there were these war librarians, that the ALA teamed up with the War Department, and they thought that books were a priority in the middle of war.
Yeah.
Like, that was magical to me. I was enthralled by that. I was like, in what world? Do they, look at COVID. They closed down, bookstores, libraries. They're not essential businesses. Well, in 1917, they thought they were. They thought these men need books.
Yes.
Whether they're in the hospital, whether they're on the front lines. And that was just so magical. And then in reading about all that, I found that list of banned books. And it's like, oh, that significantly reduces the magic.
I was shocked that
definitely
ALA
makes it
was
feel worse.
bending to them.
Yeah.
Because today,
It's 100%.
ALA will not bend.
No, absolutely not.
We will not bend. So I'm also a member of VLA because I'm from Virginia and I belong to Virginia Library Association. And like our main person there, she's constantly going to the state capitol and advocating for not banning books.
Right,
and
that's the
why
image I have now of the ALA,
Yeah,
which is fabulous. And
Yeah,
should be.
that's what librarians are doing. We're fighting.
Right,
for
it's
this
not like
access.
sitting behind a desk telling people
Oh,
to hush.
no. If you think librarians still are wearing like their hair in buns, I mean, occasionally mine's in a bun. If you think that we're still shushing people, you have not been in the library in a long time. I ran a messy play date just a couple of days ago, and the room was completely demolished,
Destroyed.
Like you could tell the babies were there.
That's the best type of library.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a picture of me in the newspaper when I was like 3 at the library with my little sister at a pajama party, and we're God knows we were very loud.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, so it was that banned book list that I was
Yeah.
like, okay, this is what I have to write about. I thought it was interesting. Now I'm hooked because it was just so ironic seeming that they would be providing these books and banning them. And of course, eventually, as I wrote it, I realized, it's not as ironic as it sounds. It actually makes a lot of sense because providing those books, the reason they do that is because they believe that books have power.
Yeah.
And they're banning the books because they think that they have power. But
the interesting thing is, a war later, we were talking about, the Nazis were banning books.
Right.
And it's like,
remember? And actually, the American Library in Paris had ovens that they said, you can just stick them in there if you need to get... I know. It like hurts.
Oh, the pain.
And Emmeline had the same reaction. She was like, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah.
We're going to do what with the books?
But what? So,
what?
yeah. So that sort of becomes one of the crux, the main theme. And
So Emmeline is your librarian, but you also have another main character. We have a woman trying to get into the
Kathleen
an
is
academy
in this.
for the first time ever, and I gotta know how much you cried, because that being a former enlisted woman, I had to take brain breaks.
Yeah.
Putting myself in her shoes, feeling the way she's felt. I got harassed. I got, hazed, whatever you want to call it.
Hazed.
And it was the early 2000s.
excuse, yeah.
It's the early 2000s then. And
It's that boys will be boys excuse. I
Right.
hate that.
It just happens to
and
everyone.
while it wasn't as severe as she was facing,
It was there.
it was there. And women still are facing, the trouble and the problems women are facing today in the military, not so different. It's not as extreme. It's not as in your face. It's more behind doors, closed doors, and we just brush it under the rug now.
They're told not to talk about it.
Yep. And just pushed away. And for you to just blast it out there and remind everybody, hey,
This
Yeah.
happens.
Well, I
This
think that's,
fucking
that's
happens.
what fits with that first timeline, right? We're not going to censor it. We're not going to whitewash it.
right.
We're not going to pretend
Right.
it's better
So,
than it was. And
how's your
I mean,
heart?
it was painful.
how's
It
your
was
heart?
painful
Because
to
this
write.
is hard.
Because it's 1976. This is not 6,000 years ago.
Right.
Right? Like my uncle said, "Oh yeah, I remember when it went co-ed."
But
Yeah.
it was just a few years before I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Like,
just a few years before I
yeah.
was born.
And
You know,
my oldest is reading it now. She's reading it for school. She's using it for her last book of the year. And she's reading the boot camp stuff. And she's like, you were born what year, Mom? And I go, 83. And so she does the math. And she's like, you didn't get yelled at. And I go, girl, you're going to get yelled at.
Yeah.
You're going to, when you join up, it doesn't matter if you go enlisted, officer,
Yep.
you have boobs and a vagina, they're going to treat you different.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, it was so alarming. the things
I,
that-
I actually let Molly know ahead of time. I'm like, when you read this, be in a headspace
Yeah.
that you can take it. Because
Yeah.
I knew, you know, I haven't been to war as a librarian. I feel like I
And
go to
sometimes
war
it might
every
seem like
day
it,
as a
yeah.
librarian, but yeah. So it wasn't as that way for me. For me, it was like, oh my gosh, this is history of my profession that I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Right.
But I knew for Molly it would hit different.
Right.
And it's
yeah.
just,
Yeah, it's good. So you have a lot of positive feedback coming
Ma'am.
for this book.
Ma'am.
So how's that been? Like getting this like
It's exciting. It is really exciting, and
nerve-wracking,
I-
I'm sure.
well, a lot of the bad feedback is my favorite actually. I had one person gave it a 1-star
Don't read
on
Goodreads.
Goodreads.
Don't read Goodreads.
I don't usually, but it popped up. She finished it without reading the whole thing
Oh.
because she expected a book about women librarians and in the military.
that's what
Okay,
it was.
I don't
that's
know.
what it was.
But instead, she got a social justice warrior talking about race and sexism.
What do you think was happening?
I know.
What
So
do you
I
think
wear
was
that as
going
a badge of
on?
honor. I'm like, that's a 1-star review. I will proudly tell people about.
I don't know how you write a book like this without talking about how there were
Do
black
you
men
think we're
serving
just-
our country that were separated.
Racism
yeah.
wasn't happening in
Yeah.
the 40s. JK.
Right.
JK.
Before that even. Like it's crazy. And so I try to put those things in there on purpose, and I try to be sensitive about it. You know, I've never lived as a black person, obviously, much less in 1918.
Right.
You know, so I don't have Emmeline is not a black woman. You know, I don't
Yeah.
I don't go that. You know, I that's not my story to tell. But you can't tell these stories without
Right.
including that.
Right.
I
It
like
would be
how
real.
Emmeline tries to go around and like we're just gonna have the book club in their part of the
Right.
camp.
And the fact that there was a their part of
Right.
their camp.
Right.
And that's another thing in terms of research. It was hard to document. It wasn't an official rule, but they tried to keep them separate, but it kind of depended on who was in charge of the hospital and basically how racist he was.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But, you know, they were these segregated units, and they were typically pushed into, they were grave diggers. They
Yep.
were, you know, they not that you really want to be on the front lines of battle, but they weren't given the glory
Yeah.
parts of it. They were doing these menial, depressing tasks.
yeah. And one of the characters who's in that unit, the hospital unit, is actually an officer, and he's not separated.
He's not
like
in the
with
officer
he's not-
housing.
yeah,
Yes.
I thought that was
Point.
really interesting. I actually, my husband's retired military, and I pointed that
Okay.
out to him too. I was like, "Babe," and he was like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that probably is what happened."
Yeah.
So, what's going on now? Are we writing another book? Or are we...
I'm actually, you'll be excited, writing a middle grades.
Yay! We love middle grade.
Yeah,
So,
yay!
so can you talk about
Yeah,
it? Are you
it's,
on a...
I mean, it's very unofficial so far. Like,
Okay.
who even knows if it'll become a thing?
It will be a
it's-
thing.
Well, thank you. It's about a girl in New Orleans in 1879, probably. I recently changed it, so it's currently 1879.
It could be different in a month. Well, who knows?
And she has albinism, and there was something that historians call the ugly law. It was not called that at the time, but if you were disfigured, maimed, all these horrible words, you could not beg in the streets.
Oh.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
really walk in the streets because you offended people by existing.
Of course.
And
I mean, I offend people by existing all the time.
She's
we
a
thank you
professional
for it.
offending
Come
people.
get it.
So New Orleans was one of the few southern cities actually that had a law like this on the books. It was big in Chicago, San Francisco, but my grandparents are in Baton Rouge. My mom was born in New Orleans, so
Okay.
it's just such an odd place. Like it's
Yeah.
just so good for spooky so she
Oh, Nola's got that.
Yeah, it's got
it's
everything.
Just, it's got
It's
that.
definitely haunted.
yes.
For
So
sure.
It's got that Creole, backwoods,
everything.
witch
It's
doctor
got-
vibe. Yeah.
So she can no longer beg, so instead she gets a job with a medium, because this is, just at the tail end of all the Victorian seance weirdness, and she plays a ghost for him, because that's what she looks like according to the Times. They don't think that this is like a normal medical condition.
That is amazing.
And then there's a mystery and actual real ghosts involved. And
Is it dual timelines
no,
too?
actually, it's just
Oh wow, that's interesting. Because
My kids will be all over that.
oh my goodness, I hope so.
Your other book, your first book, Luna Park,
was also dual timeline.
was also dual timelines. And I just have to say something on a personal note. So our friend Nurse Katie read Luna Park 1st and then read this one, and she was like, she got all of the medical stuff right. Molly said, she got all of the military stuff right. I said, she got the librarian stuff right. That never happens.
You can't get all three of us to agree on a book.
I will say I
Never.
had help.
That's okay.
That's okay.
The
That
author,
kind of research, you need help.
yeah, for the Light of Luna Park, we send it out to other authors to blurb, and one of the authors got back to us with the Light of Luna Park and said, I don't want to blurb it, but I will correct a couple of the medical inconsistencies. And I was like, I should probably be offended, but also thanks.
I appreciate it.
Right.
You're awesome.
Yeah. So I'm glad that
never
it felt
heard
very
of
realistic.
the Luna Park babies.
So bizarre.
Never. So can you tell us a little bit about Luna
Yeah.
Park? And this is your first book.
Yes, it's also dual timeline. The Light of Luna Park, and the first timeline is 1926. It's about a nurse who steals a baby from the hospital without
As
the
you do,
parents
right?
knowing. Right.
As we do.
I said I'm never going to get a job babysitting again after this story. And anti-stealing babies, for the record.
I'm on the fence.
That's a good stand.
A good right, yeah. That one I'll go with. But and she does this to take it to the Coney Island baby incubators. On Luna Park, there's this basically a sideshow where this man named Dr. Cooney, but he's not actually a doctor, runs it.
Doctor.
Yeah, Dr. Cooney.
Like Dr. J.
Runs it. And he charges people to come in and just stare at the babies. And they do shows, they'll slide a wedding ring over the baby's arm to show how tiny they are, how premature they are. And it's like this weird semi-exploitative space that people really criticized, but for the most part it actually did a lot of good. And that's what modern historians and just modern humans have sort of all seem to agree on for the most part. He saved thousands of babies' lives because hospitals were not doing it. Partially because it was hard and they didn't have the technology and it was expensive, but partially because of eugenics. And they thought these babies are weaklings, they are not worth saving, they're just going to create
Failure to thrive.
Yes.
Failure to
yeah,
thrive.
they're not
fittest.
the desirable, exactly, the fittest. And at Coney Island, there are fitter families contests and better baby contests. So it's all in that context.
Yeah.
So that's Althea. She steals the baby. And then in 1950 and 1951, Stella is a special education teacher, though of course it's not called special education at the time, and it hardly even exists at the time. She has a class of, you have to have a class of 10. If there aren't 10 kids in the district, then there's no special ed available. So those 9 kids
So
are out of
we have
luck.
inclusion now.
I know. And there were not usually 10 kids in the district because the doctors would say this baby needs to be institutionalized.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they would even say it's better for you to just not even visit. It'll just confuse them.
Just
you
just
just
ignore your
relinquish your
child.
child
Just
forever.
give him to the government
Right.
and ignore
It'll
him
be
for the rest of
fine.
their lives.
I-
What could go wrong?
I can't imagine that because my oldest son is autistic. So for me, I'm just like.
I mean, can you imagine a medical professional telling you there's nothing you can do? You cannot teach this child.
I would never
you
hand a
cannot-
kid over.
My kid is
It's-
twice exceptional because he's also gifted as
Yeah.
well. So he's socially awkward, but he's freaking
Same.
brilliant.
Who's not? Yeah.
Same.
He's in the 99th percentile on
Yeah,
math.
he's
He did
incredible.
not get that from me. He did not get that from me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many kids in my classes that,
Yeah.
that a few years ago would not have been in my classes.
Right,
They would have
absolutely.
been somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And they are thriving there.
Right, absolutely.
So you're writing and teaching at the same time. Are you exhausted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tend to, it's nice because I'm not on deadline right now. You know, there's nothing expected of me. I can write if I feel like it. If I never write a book again,
That's okay too.
not
I will
trouble.
be sad
Yeah.
if you never write a book again.
Seriously.
Okay? So you need to
we
do
would be
it.
heartbroken.
but no deadline. So that makes it easy to sort of push things back to really just focus in on the summer and then do editing and brainstorming and researching during the year.
So
kind of where I'm at right now.
What do your students think about you being an author.
They actually think it's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. I
Last
love that.
year in Nashville, my kids did not care at all. I don't think they fully understood that I didn't like. They're like, yeah, we're all authors. We all write books, which is great. Which is a great attitude. But I don't think they understood.
I'm a
The
real one.
the alpha generation is so confident and cocky.
Right.
so sweet.
It is exhausting,
It's
but they're
amazing, though.
little honey badgers, right?
Yeah, and they're gonna save the world.
They are.
They have
or
no doubt.
burn it down. I'm not sure.
Jury's
about,
still out on that one.
So how did you? Is historical fiction your favorite genre? Is that how you landed here?
Yes, it's always been my favorite to read. I've never really taken any formal. I mean, definitely in school, I didn't take any writing, anything. It was just from reading it. Like I figured out how it works.
So who's your favorite historical fiction then?
There's so many. Kate Quinn,
Quinn's
obviously.
good.
Fiona Davis is great with the dual timelines. Diane Chamberlain is not like officially historical fiction, but so many of them are. I love hers. I got a blurb from her and I was like, blurb from Lisa Wingate also. It was,
Big deal.
There are just so many. Literally any woman who writes historical fiction
Yeah.
is my favorite.
Yeah.
Like, I love them all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've read. Quinn had one that was a spy.
The Alice Network.
Yes. So I
So
really
good.
liked that one too. But this is better. This is better. Sorry. No, sorry. Because again, I was like, but I feel like this doesn't. My complaint. We read a historical fiction book. For Pod called
A Discovery of Witches?
No, not that one. The book of Lost Names.
By Kristen Harmel.
Yes,
Yeah, I have issues with it.
Really?
We were both like, this doesn't add anything to the genre.
Oh, really?
But I love everything.
Yeah. See,
This adds.
I'm definitely not a critic. I'm like, it's a book. I love it.
This adds to historical fiction genre,
Right.
which is my
That-
biggest complaint. Is like,
Okay,
I'm like, it's
that's
all
a
been
lot of
done.
that's the rule.
Yeah.
Does it
That's
add?
fair. No, that's fair.
Does it add? Is it helping? We just had this conversation actually about American Royals.
Yeah,
Because
American Royals. Yeah.
It's very much like The Selection
It's The
and
Selection.
Royal Bee and all that. And while it's there, which the episode hasn't gone out yet, spoilers, it's not adding. So you belong.
Yes.
But be a part, build
Right,
up,
right.
help the genre.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
And that's usually why I don't like historical fiction. Well, my favorite book actually happens to be historical fiction. It's Kill a Mockingbird. So
Okay.
it was written in the 60s and set in the 40s. So it's historical fiction.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
not
I mean,
just
this
classic.
is the 70s. That's
Yeah. So my whole thing is if it was written and takes place in a time period in the past, it's historical fiction. It takes place in the present, it's either fantasy or sci-fi. But anyway, because that's my favorite book and it has this high place for me, I think that's why I usually struggle.
That makes
But
sense.
but again, like I can't say this enough. I'm really not. I promise you, I'm not just like blowing smoke here.
she's
I
not.
promise
She
you.
does.
I don't
I'm gonna
do
take
that.
you guys with me everywhere.
I don't do that. Like I finished the book and I texted Molly and said, Molly, I'm gonna go and do a reel because I really liked this one and you
I
wanted
called her a
I was
liar.
like,
I literally called her a liar. I
Yeah,
go,
she's
liar.
like, you're not saying you're lying.
Liar,
I was like,
lies.
oh my gosh, I'm not though. You need to get on this one. It was so good.
You guys are the best.
Yeah. Well, I promise you, we don't do this with everybody. We kind of pride ourselves on giving honest critiques.
Yeah.
I
You're gonna
appreciate
get the
that.
truth
That's something
either way.
I'm not good at.
Yeah.
So process is a big part for me as a writer.
Yeah.
So how do you go about? Do you research first? Are you a pantser? Do you
Definitely a pantser.
format? Oh.
Definitely a pantser.
Yeah.
Not
That's
so
gonna backfire.
hard.
How do you pants
Two
without
timelines and two narrators.
Okay,
What
I
do you
have
mean?
know where
so
it
many
starts and I know where it
questions
ends. That's about it. For the War Librarian, I did have to outline it because
Yeah.
my editors demanded it.
Well,
Not because I wanted to.
I mean, well,
They
but the amount.
demanded you outline it?
So
How
cruel,
dare they?
right?
Excuse
Rude.
me.
Rude.
No, this isn't your process. Secondly, go away. But with this, you would have to. It's
Yeah.
just the research
No,
demands
there's
it.
yeah. And so in terms of the research, I'll do like one big deep dive at the beginning until I find like the question that can be at the core of the book that drives the plot.
So-
So the censorship versus the providing the books. For Luna Park, this man saving thousands of lives, but also he was a liar. He was not a real doctor. And once I had that, I could start writing, and the rest of the research I would do throughout.
So what sparked these ladies? Who are they for you?
Um,
Where did they come from?
Kathleen is a lot like my little sister. She's graduating from Auburn next week
her.
with a degree in professional flight, like as a pilot.
Wow.
Yes, which much like the military, which she doesn't want to do. She's not doing Air Force or anything. But it's very male dominated.
Yeah.
and her class is 1/3 female, which is still very skewed, but it's not as bad as you might expect. But the instructors and the administration, and I mean, she's 5'2", so for a woman, a little bit short, but not like tiny.
Yeah.
She can't fit in
Compared
the
to
plane.
me, she's tiny.
She has to put a bunch of pillows behind her to reach the pedals because they're built for the average male, not
Right.
for the
Yeah.
average female. So even those like tiny things that you never think about, she got pulled aside and got told to wear less revealing clothing at the airport because it was distracting to the men who are flying our airplanes. If they get that easily distracted, I don't want them flying me anywhere.
What goes on in your head and in your pants should not be influenced by the fact that I have to wear clothes that fits my boobs in them.
And she was, I mean, not that it would matter. She could show up in skin tight dress, cocktail dress, and
wouldn't
that'd be
matter.
fine. But she wasn't even. Like, she was wearing her normal clothes.
Rude.
She was like, I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah. No, my
Yeah,
children...
you must be covered. We
Right.
must not reveal even the ankle.
So anyway, Kathleen and Ryan, have some things in common. Except Kathleen is much more like not reclusive, but she's
Yeah.
like, I can depend on myself. And
Yeah.
Ryan is very much like, if if you're her friend, she will die, kill for you, die for you, kill for you both. So she's kind of a antisocial version of Ryan, though she grows to be more social. Emmeline's probably me. She likes books. She doesn't like
So
talking
this was
to
for
people
you and
that
your
much.
sister.
Yeah, in a way, and it's dedicated to her.
That's
To
beautiful.
Ryan at the front. It's a little thing about that.
So, when are you going to write the book about the pilot?
I honestly,
The female pilot.
I truly am tempted. I
You've
really
got
am.
to.
I was
You
reading
gotta.
the other day about I think it was the first woman in Australia to get her pilot's license. And she did like medical care in like the outback. She would fly people back and forth. I thought that was so cool in like the 40s.
Yeah.
You
So,
should see some... Have you done much research on Amelia Earhart and her
haven't.
process?
No.
The work that woman put in to just get close to an airplane, to even be allowed to look at them
Really?
on the airfield. It's
haven't at all.
amazing.
Our
mean,
boobs
it's-
mess things up. It's,
Yeah.
How dare we be born with different genetics,
Yeah.
right?
I liked that in the Naval Academy light. The
Yeah.
fact that they didn't know how to make a uniform.
Right.
Yeah.
For
They
women.
made
They
them
didn't
walk
fit-
in heels.
They made them walk in heels. The skirts didn't fit, or the shirts didn't fit over their hips, and then the purses for the tampons or for the pads or
Yeah.
whatever. And then they couldn't wear the purses anymore because
Because
the
they
men
got
got
an
mad
advantage.
Yeah.
that it was an advantage. They could carry study materials with them.
They had to like literally lob
But
off
the men
the
had
heels
pockets.
because they were getting
Yes.
shin splints from
And
running
Ridiculous.
in heels.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Ridiculous. So there's I think it's YA, but it might be middle grade book called Fly Girls.
Yeah.
That's-
I've heard of it. I haven't read it, but
So
I've heard of it.
that's a good one because they
Okay.
do. So it's actually about an African American who's doing passing, is what they call it in there. She's very fair skinned, and so she's pretending to be white so
Right.
that she can fly. But it's a lot of the early women who were flying and test pilots. You get a lot of their stories in there.
Wow.
So
Yeah, I'll have to read
that's
that.
that's a good one.
That's good to know.
So maybe I like historical fiction. I don't
Yeah,
know.
you sound
She
a little
does.
suspicious here.
She just
Your
likes to be
favorite book's
hypercritical.
historical fiction. Well, it's your favorite, so you have a higher standard. It makes sense.
Yeah, I
Has
might
to
be.
be.
I mean, might be a little sus. So
A little.
a little,
Just a little sus.
So when is your panel today?
I already had it. It was
Your-
at 10.
Oh, her panel was at 10. Okay, so if you missed it, sorry.
But there are books to buy.
There are books to buy. There is a book sale going on. We're at the Annapolis Book Festival at the Key School. There are books here. There is a great book sale, and it benefits the school. So help out.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Just go see them.
if you buy one of the books from one of the authors that we're interviewing, like the War Librarian, there may be a sticker in there that says Book Besties on it. So yay for that. Anything else we need to know?
Gosh, I don't know. Y'all are so fun. I just.
Oh, thanks. Well, you are welcome to come back
Anytime.
anytime.
I would love to.
We,
Yes.
we film distantly, so
Okay,
you can be in New
good to
York
know.
and hop on with
All
us.
right,
so.
maybe that middle grades one if it ever.
Yeah.
That'd be
Off
great.
the ground.
That'd be great.
So-
I mean, she has a middle schooler. My son's
Yep,
going to
she
middle
was
school
telling me,
next
oh,
year.
oof, good luck.
I run the Battle of the Books program for our community library where I work, and
Yeah.
so
Awesome.
we
That
need
would be a
middle
lot
grade
of fun.
books. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Addison.
Thank
so
y'all.
much.
Thank you for
This has
watching.
been delightful.
This was
I
so
love your
fun.
energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Says you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll-
y'all.
All right, besties. We'll see you next